Hey, it's Ron McLean. Welcome to Hockey Talk on the Rock.
With Laura and Keith.
It's interesting.
So let's back up a second.
He played absolutely out of his mind.
It made no sense to me.
And now, here are your hosts.
Okay. All right. We are back doing Hockey Talk on the Rock after an extended hiatus. Episode number 57. I looked today. We haven't done this since November 6th, which is kind of crazy for us because it's the 30th. Partially my fault because I was away on doing stuff, honeymoon, etc. But, we've got some things to talk about. I know we've got the demise of the Canucks season to really comb over. We got some news from Montreal, the big news to talk about. I want to touch on the Flyers a little bit because they've kind of gone down a similarly disappointing path for the Vancouver Canucks. But, we'll do our thing. We'll talk some stuff and let's get into it. Let's hear what the Canucks have been up to because I was away for a week. And even before that, I kind of took a break from watching.
Yeah, so, it's been a very positive period of time to be a Canucks fan. Super healthy, nothing going on that's wrong here. So the Canucks have been awful. And I say this again as someone who has been basically obsessed with the Canucks since I think I was like 10. So this point in my Canucks fandom is the least interested I've been with watching Canucks games ever. I basically put them on in the background and then just work. And then if something happens, I'm like, okay, it happened. But basically it's that they lose. So last night was the game, actually the first game that I watched kind of without distraction because my friend is a Montreal fan. So we decided to suffer together and watch the game together. And I was convinced the Canucks were going to lose. They ended up winning, which was probably, again, what they didn't need to do. It's so disappointing to see this team that is obviously incorrectly built, which is the main problem. Well, there's a couple of main problems. That's one of the main problems. The other main problem comes down to the front office or really the ownership, because again, it's very clear that Jim Benning should not be an NHL GM. He should not have been one for the past 8 years, but he's still in there. And then, Travis Green, I don't know. I still don't know how I feel about Travis Green. There's all these reports that he's such a good coach, but it's not a fit in Vancouver. It's clearly not a fit. There's something that's missing between the ears. With Montreal, if we want to compare teams, because we'll get into the Bergevin stuff in a second, but with Montreal having this disappointing season, at least they have excuses. It's like, okay, they don't have Carey Price. They don't have Shea Weber. They lost a couple pieces. The Canucks built in the offseason, and we were kind of promised a team that was going to be a bit better than last year, and somehow it's worse. And again, during the really dark days of being a Canucks fan in like 2016, 2017, we were sold on this promise of having these up and coming young stars like Besser and Pettersson, something to look forward to. Now we don't even have that. So it's just very hard. And again, those are the players who are struggling. Like we can get into that too, but it's just not a good time. And my level of Canuck angst right now is that I've sworn off wearing anything Canuck related until they make a move. They have to fire someone, and it does sound like that is going to happen. All the reports now are that they're taking their time to make sure that their hire is the correct hire, which, okay, that's great. But if it comes down to the fact that it is ownership that wants to meddle in the day-to-day actions of the GM, then I don't really know who's going to want to work for the Canucks that could do a better job. So anyway, that's my rant. I'll keep it nice and light.
All right. Well, I'll pick up quickly with the Travis Green thing.
Yeah.
I agree he's not a fit. I think he was very good for the developing years of these young players. Like he seems like he was the type of guy who was good to get these guys who were coming out of wherever, the Swedish league or the juniors or college, and like get them moving in the right direction in the best league in the world. But in terms of like making a top team in the league out of those players now that they have developed. It seems like he doesn't have the experience, obviously. Like this is his first NHL gig, and it's just not working. So I can see him being like, let's say, a Mike Sullivan-esque coach, where he didn't work out in his first time around in Boston, I think it was.
Yeah.
And that was his first gig, and he got it figured out, obviously, in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So wouldn't be disappointed to see him go. The big thing is Benning. Well, I think we've been on the bandwagon together with this for a long time, and I think a lot of it is like too much faith in that guy. I'll give him credit, like I said in the summer, that he was really, really good at signing RFA contracts, and maybe even the first deal out of RFAs like Demko and Horvat, and Besser, like Hughes. Like the contracts he did was good. His drafting, a lot of people say, was really good. I mean, when you have high draft picks all the time, you're gonna hit on some of them, and he's even missed on a few of those. So is he that good? I'm not sure. Like, you lost Gadjevich, who was a high second round pick, for nothing. Same with Darlene, who's having a bit of a small breakout year in San Jose. So
yeah,
he's got to go, and it's really frustrating to see and hear that Montreal got the drop on them with Jeff Gordon, because I thought, like we talked about, he did a pretty damn good and honest job in New York of tearing it down and rebuilding the right way. And why he lost his job, I think, is still absurd. And the rumor was Montreal brought him in when they did, because they kind of were worried that Vancouver were going to do it if they didn't. And like, they need that president role. They need more oversight. They need a bigger hockey office, like, from what I understand, and I don't know for sure, but it's like and Wise brought, and sure, they brought in Sedins as like advisors, but they're kind of like learning what they're doing. So
the Sedins aren't ready yet, right? And I think that's part of the problem, is that they, like, ownership foresaw that they'd be able to kind of delay this for another year or something, so the Twins would be ready to take on that president role, but they're not, like, right now. So I mean, it's for me, the part that I find very frustrating is, I guess, in like the last 2-3 years, I started to become paranoid that the Canucks were going to have to rebuild. They're essentially not rebuild, but it was a rebuild, except they never properly did it. So again, my fear was that they were going to have to tear this down and then start over. And I think now there's no choice. They have to do it. And I'm actually on board with them doing it. Again, I have emotional attachments to a lot of these players, but I don't think it would be bad if you just moved out pieces and got assets back at this stage. Because again, it is frustrating, because they do have pieces that are good, like Demko, very good goalie. And if there's any positive I can take away from this season, it's that Demko is legit an NHL starting goalie. But, and I started thinking about this today with the success that Markstrom's had in Calgary specifically now, because I think all Canucks fans are kind of unified in saying, like, okay, Benning made the right choice in keeping Demko and letting Markstrom walk. But there is maybe a piece of me now that's like, maybe you could have kept Markstrom and you could have flipped Demko and gotten something pretty good. But again, goalies don't normally get a lot of value in return. Basically, my long-winded rant about this is that if you do rebuild the rebuild, you're going to waste Demko.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I'll agree with you totally. Like, I can't take anything away from Halak or Demko, because, like, even in their big losses, like, what are you going to do? Like, when the team's playing that bad in front of you, like, I think they played well enough, or even better than well enough, considering the team in front of them. And I think another big takeaway, I'm going to tie this into my Flyers take in a little bit here, is how essential it is to have one of your top two centers be so defensively sound and astute,
Sure.
So Bo Horvat's not that guy.
No.
He's not defensively capable. He's not a good penalty killer. They don't like using him on the penalty kill anymore. His defensive skills didn't develop the way that they kind of thought they would. Yes. And like, you see it with Montreal. We talked a little bit about Montreal. They let Deneau walk. Kotkaniemi was going to fill that. They botched that too. So they don't have a shutdown guy, and it's killing them. I mean, sure, Price and Weber, but like, how many more games would they have won if they had Price and Weber? Like, I don't know, a few maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think Price alone, you got to say maybe 5.
Right.
Just
Well,
give him
like,
the benefit of the doubt, but they're not a. I don't think they're a playoff team with Carey Price.
no,
Right.
I agree. I agree. And so having that defensive center is so important. And like again, like I said, I was going to tie into the Flyers. Is part of their struggle has been like at the beginning of the season, in the silly season when things are a little bit not normal. Derek Brassard filled in really well in that second line center role for Kevin Hayes being hurt, and now the season's like well in underway and all the systems are developed by all the teams. He can't fill that role. And Hayes came back and he got hurt right away. And like it's really, really hurting them.
Yeah.
And Ryan Ellis too, being a shutdown D man, he was supposed to be the big stabilizing thing on the back end, and he's played like 4 games. So I feel like the Flyers have a bit more of an excuse because those 2 players alone are like pretty critical to their success, and without them, they've been not doing well.
Yeah.
But to tie in the Ellis thing, to tie the Ellis thing into Vancouver is sure they brought in Ekman Larson, but like we talked about before in our talks here, is like Hughes and Myers and Ekman Larson are just too much of the same cut from the same cloth. They're not defensively sound enough. They're not penalty killers. They're not those shutdown guys. And that's where like I don't think Tanev is a comparable to a Niskanen or an Ellis, or like he's not a first line shutdown guy, but like maybe if they still had Tanev and Hamonic wasn't so weird and like played all the time, things would be a little bit different, especially on the penalty kill, right? So it's so frustrating. And possibly my last thing is the most frustrating part is, and I think you'll totally agree, like coming into the season, we're like, man, this top 9 is going to be so good.
Yeah.
And they're averaging like less than 2 goals scored a game. Like, how are you going to win in this league when you can't score goals and you have that top 9 the way it is?
And this is where I think it does come back to coaching, because I know there's all this talk about what's wrong with Pettersson and what's wrong with Besser, but part of that has to come from the coach. That you have to be able to get the best out of your best players, and I really don't think to this point in the year he has. And like last night, it was very refreshing to see. Like the happiest moment I had watching that game was seeing Pettersson score on a one-timer. It was like, okay, he still has something. It's there. I just don't know why. I mean, it's such a weird thing, the whole situation. But I agree with you. Like the positives that I can take away from the Canucks season again is Demko. I've really liked Connor Garland. I feel like he's been their most consistent forward. And then Höglander and Podkolzin. Like Höglander has had his moments. He's looked very good and he looks like he wants to win. Podkolzin has looked good. But if those are the 3 forwards that you're listing as being like your most consistent players, your team is in trouble. It can't be those guys. And I don't know if all those, like all the rumors about the Canucks locker room are true, if there's that many rifts and stuff going on in there. But if that is true, someone needs to be moved out, basically.
Yeah, and so it's a good segue into what I want to do with you here, because there's lots of trade spec. I think it should too. I don't think Benning should be doing anything. He has not earned the right to be trading any of these players. So I hope they don't trade anybody off the roster until they have someone else in place. But before we talk about what I think and what you think who should be traded and blah blah blah, just wanted to go through and I'll give you some names and I want you to tell me shooter or playmaker. And I know for some you're going to want to say both, but try to pick one of the 2.
Okay.
Pettersson.
I'll say playmaker.
Okay. Horvat.
Shooter.
Besser.
Shooter.
Miller.
I'll say shooter. But
Pearson.
Shooter.
Garland.
Oh man, that one's tough too. I'll say playmaker, but it's close.
I think you see I'm going Podkolzin from what we've seen so far.
In the NHL or in juniors?
In the NHL.
Shooter.
Okay, so this is kind of where I'm going is they don't have a lot of playmakers.
No.
Well, the one that I would want to do, and this is based on total like stuff we're hearing in the media and shit, but the 2 big ones of the guys who are going to fall out of their prime quickest are Miller and Horvat.
Sure.
And I feel like Horvat is the guy I would most want to see traded, captaincy aside or whatever, because they need someone who's a playmaker and who can shut things down.
Yeah.
And I think I might have said more shooters than you would have said when I was listing off those players, because it's so frustrating. It's tough, right? So, and also I feel like Miller's really shown, especially with the pandemic last year, that like he kind of seems like more of the heart and soul guy. Like, when they were going to be forced back to play, when they weren't ready, like it wasn't Bo that came out and talked to the media, it was JT Miller. Like a lot of the times JT Miller's talking to the media and being that face and being willing to talk and blah blah blah. So I feel like he's more built
for that.
Do that, and probably that comes from learning what he did wrong in New York and learning from Tampa Bay and stuff like that. Like Horvat doesn't really have that, right?
Yeah. Like the kind of comparison that I heard about Horvat and Miller is that Horvat is more of like the company man, in the sense that he's like, okay, guys, we got to listen to the GM. We got to listen to the coach because they're the coach and they're the GM. Whereas Miller's more like, no, this is stupid. Like, why are we doing this? It's not working. And that's where part of this divide has come from. So again, you can question those two leadership styles essentially, but they're not.
Yeah. And I did read that like Bo skipped the team's Halloween party and stuff like that. And so have you ever seen the movie Draft Day with Kevin Costner?
No.
Okay. You should watch it. It's a football movie, but it's fantastic because it's like the behind the scenes personalities, building a team, etc. Draft Day. Really well done. And ultimately, you'll find out if you watch it that they're going to draft this quarterback really high. But like, there's why is he the way? Like, there's questions about his character, and then ultimately they found out that like he had a big birthday party and none of his teammates went to this birthday party. And so they're like, oh, like, I don't know, is this the character guy we want to build our team around? So it kind of reminded me of that movie when I heard like, oh, Borva didn't go to the team. Like, I don't know. If you're the captain, I feel like you at least make an appearance and stuff like that.
There's something that's weird that's going on in the room. Again,
for sure.
Like, I agree with you. I think it's one of those two guys that gets moved out. And I also think that if there is a new GM that comes in, he's going to be less attached to players that, might have like higher places in kind of Canuck or the Canucks organization right now. So like a Horvat, right?
Right.
They'll be less like attached to.
And so the second player that I would want to move, I mean, like I'm not touching the defense just because like the defense is pretty difficult to like.
No one's gonna want anything that you're gonna want to move on the defense.
Right. Exactly. So my second pick would be Besser.
Yeah.
Only because I feel like wingers are easier to come by. I feel like Podkolzin and Höglander are going to be capable with Garland to be able to fill those roles, and use them with Miller as your 4 top wingers. And it makes me reflect back to like the Besser for Dumba rumors and like, oh man, maybe that wouldn't have been so bad.
I don't know. I still like I have an attachment to Brock Besser, and I've already decided in my mind if they trade him, I'm adopting whatever team they trade him to as my second team, because I love his personality and I love his shot. So for me, I wouldn't want them to trade him, but I do understand it. And I also think you're probably going to get a better return for Brock than you would for someone else.
Right.
So
I
see it. But again, just don't let Jimbo do anything that's 1-for-1 with a forward and a defenseman. That's all I'm going to say.
So would you, like, are you on the same page, or is there someone that would jump to the front line before those two, or would you be an
I honestly would move Miller.
You'd move Miller.
I think Miller's going to fall off, and I think right now his peak is you're going to get the most for him that you're going to get. I also don't think that Miller will re-sign with the Canucks. I don't think Horvat's going to re-sign with the Canucks either, but I just think you get the most for him that you can probably at this trade deadline. So for me, I would honestly potentially move both Miller and Horvat.
Right.
But those are the two for me, the top two.
Yeah.
But I get the Besser thing. Like, I do get it as a non biased perspective.
For sure. So I mean, one other team / player that I've been kind of looking at and wondering, like, I wonder if there's any possibility, since they're struggling so bad, is the Islanders and
Yeah.
Matthew Barzal. And it really sucks because I think Barzal is awesome. He's become one of my favorite players, but this year he's playing awfully, and so is the whole team.
I think the Islanders get a semi-pass, and the reason why I say it is because they were on the road for basically the whole start to their season, and then they got COVID. So I feel like they've been awful, but I don't think they're this bad. And I don't think Barzal is that bad. And I doubt they move him, basically. It would be sweet. I agree. But yeah, I can't see it.
So would you entertain the idea of a Pedersen for Barzal swap?
Sure.
Really?
I feel like they're honestly, they're quite similar players when they're on their game. So if the idea was to, spark them or whatever in a new location, I feel like I would entertain that deal. But again, I don't see the Islanders doing anything with Barzal this year.
Right.
Like if it continued onward, sure. But
yeah. And I mean, for me, it's just kind of fun to speculate because I feel like Barzal is maybe not slightly, more of a playmaker than Pedersen is. And so,
sure.
If he'd be flanking someone like Miller and Bester, maybe that might work a bit better. But it's easy to play, armchair GM.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk a little more in depth about the Montreal thing.
I mean, I feel like it's not surprising, especially since Bergevin basically said he probably didn't want to come back next year anyway. Like in the off season, he said that, which Jeff Molson didn't like, so he kind of got the upper hand on him essentially. But I feel like I think we talked about this before, but Bergevin was hired when I was like 20 in Montreal. It's been a long time, and they needed a different voice. And I mean, it's not much different than what's going on in Vancouver, except for the fact that they acted on it and they went to a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds very similar in the sense that like Bergevin had like, what was it, Mellenby as his right hand man, and it was just kind of the two of them running the hockey department. Very similar to like Vancouver's situation. I think Montreal's owner has recognized that, like, starting with Jeff Gorton, you need to build it out from the top properly with more voices in the room. And I think they've talked about on Sportsnet Radio about Tampa Bay over and over and over, and how they have like 4 assistant GMs and like how well they're run. It's like, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they have won back-to-back Stanley Cups, so they must be doing something right.
And they always find these tricky little ways to get around the cap and injuries. Like, they've got smart people in the room.
Yeah, and I think that is something too, right? Is there is smart hockey people, and then it feels like there's the Canucks, and it feels like they're always kind of a step behind. And some of it is not necessarily the people who are in charge right now, like Jim Benning's fault, like the cap recapture stuff. Like, obviously you couldn't predict that that was going to happen. I mean, you could to some degree, like in terms of odds, but there's some room where I'm like, okay. But when it keeps happening and all these things keep coming up, and I mean, even the Ekman-Larsson deal, right? Like in the summer when it happened, I was like, great, they got rid of Eriksson and Beagle and Roussel, but it just seemed so short-sighted. Like right away, I was like, I hope it works, because you're taking on so much cap for so much longer. And again, it just seems like the whole thing, they're just one step behind. I'm sorry, I went back into the Canucks. I promise I'll try not to.
That's fine. I'm glad you brought up the recapture, because I was looking at it recently and I was like, oh, sweet, that's coming off the books and this year finally.
Yeah.
But the exact same amount of money is going back on the books to pay for the buyouts of Holtby and Vertanen.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just like, man, they just can't get out of their own way,
No. And again, like if you wanted to properly rebuild, which the Canucks never did after 2011, you would want to shed salary. You would want to accumulate picks. They've never done that.
Yeah.
And you just think of this team and it's like, yeah, again, there are bits and pieces of it that are exciting and young and good. But how much better would it have been if they'd done those things and they'd given themselves some room for improvement, basically? So it's depressing. And again, like you said, there was so much optimism in the summer, especially because of the division that they play in. But now that division actually doesn't even look that bad because you've got these teams. And again, I'm assuming that they're gonna take a nosedive here, specifically the California teams and specifically Anaheim. But they have started very hot. And then Seattle's won a couple games recently. So, it's just,
You never know, right? St. Louis showed, almost anything's possible a few years ago. So there's a shred of hope. I think they said that the odds right now can expect the plus 2%, but the famous line goes, so you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I don't know.
we'll
I
see.
have very little faith, but we'll see. Again, if they change something and they can give us something to be excited about, I'm sure I'm gonna get sucked back in. But right now, it's just this waiting game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I tied in my Flyers stuff that I want to touch on. I think we talked extensively here about Canucks stuff and the
Yes.
losing and the pain
Yes.
and the Montreal news. And other than that, I mean, I feel like there really hasn't been much big news in the way of league news.
The only thing I can think of is the Matt Murray getting waived by Ottawa was pretty surprising.
Yeah, that has not worked out well for them.
No, that contract it looked awful when they gave it to him, but he's just been awful in Ottawa. And then on a similar note, Evander Kane was waived and sent to the AHL. And there's all sorts of rumors about him getting traded and San Jose being willing to retain cap. Now, there was the rumor about the Canucks, and I'm just gonna say I don't believe, based on what what the Canucks organization has done, that they would move to bring in Evander Kane. Like, say what you want about Jim Benning, but he did deal with the Jake Virtanen situation very efficiently, and both the questionable draft choices that were made in the last 2 years were on the Canucks no draft list. So I have a feeling that that's just people trying to make the Canucks seem more dysfunctional than what they actually are.
Right.
But who knows? So anyway, I'll be very interested to see if they can move Evander Kane.
So yeah, if they retain 50% of the salary, which is the rumor that they're willing to do, and that's the most they can.
Yes.
$3.5 million for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
At this point, do you see a team taking a flyer? Any team?
I mean, the go-to easy answer would be Montreal, right? But I don't see that happening now that there's new ownership, or Arizona, I suppose. I don't know. I feel like you got to be really sure of what your locker room is if you're going to bring in Evander Kane. And that is why it was supposed to have worked in San Jose at the beginning, was that you had those big personalities that could kind of keep him in check, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
I read that Colorado's thinking about it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Like you say, you'd have to be super sure of your leadership group and your room.
Yeah.
But that could add some, a big winger on their team that's already pretty scary. Man.
He's, again, for the price point, if you're just looking at him like a video game player, he's a very good player.
Yeah.
But he just has so much baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, that's all I've got. That's all you got?
I think so.
All right. Well, that was a good, after over 3 weeks, that was a good get caught up on everything. So next time we talk, hopefully there's not as much pain and losing and maybe some news, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Sweet. Well, here we go. Laura and Keith, Hockey Talk on the Rock, episode number 57. We will be back.